online is just as important as all other activities related to the protection and promotion of human rights. My country was among the first countries to recognize that the rights online equal to the rights offline. And we can be very vocal with that, because according to the Freedom House evaluations and reports on freedom online, we've been ranked #2 now for the second year in a row. We are #2 after Iceland, which is good. Now we have somebody to catch. Otherwise, we were for years and years #1. We think that there is a strong link between freedom of opinion and expression online and offline and advancing democratic societies. Or, if I may put it that way, access to the internet creates new possibilities for further human rights and how to be responsible netizen. Estonia has no gender gap when it comes to the access to the internet. 84% of men and 83% of women use computers and the internet on their daily basis. And as I said, we are very independent. We have about 2,000 internet services that are provided to residents of Estonia, and we're even opening ourselves up. We're ready to provide the same services to those who are not residing in Estonia, who are residing abroad, but who want to benefit from what the internet and open internet can today provide. Bold use of ICT has been and continues to be also a business catalyst and presents new possibilities for civil society participation for all social groups, including the most vulnerable ones, women, children, people with disabilities. Internet gives endless opportunities and possibilities, but at the same time, we see that many national gender-centered policies do not take into consideration the use of ICT as a key enabler in expanding the reach of those policies in order to accelerate progress. From here, I'd like to mention 3 key questions that today are not, if not opposing, then slowing integration of the internet, human rights and women's rights. Firstly, women access to technology lags behind. Research on mobile phone ownership, for example, shows that women is still 21% less likely than a man to own a mobile phone. As to the internet use, the ITU, International Communication Union, estimates that globally 36% of women and 41% of men go online. While rates have reached almost parity across developed countries, an estimated 16% fewer women than men use the internet in developing countries. So there are about 200 million fewer women online than men. Secondly, technology in many cases is used for harmful purposes. For example, to perpetrate online harassment and abuse, especially towards young women who are maybe a bit more active online. Mobile phones and the internet have been used to facilitate sex and bride trafficking, online harassment, cyber stalking, and so on. Thirdly, the persistence of gender stereotypes and discrimination in the media remains one of the major overall challenges to women's empowerment and gender equality, and that is even easier access to these images through the internet and mobile phones. Governments have their roles. International cooperation is extremely important. Also the roles of NGOs and civil societies. I'll bring one example. In November 2014, the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Social Affairs of Estonia launched a public awareness-raising campaign, Open Your Eyes. The campaign aims at raising awareness of violence against women and teaching young people, especially women, to notice the signs and ask for professional help. We introduced it in 2 steps: awareness raising and acting upon it, including 24 hours available phone number. There are career days for boys and girls to introduce their professions that are stereotypically considered to be the professions of other sex. Education is crucial. That's why a couple of years ago we introduced programming and cyber hygiene for first graders. You have to get the attention of girls at a very early age. And for first graders, there is no difference. Whether it's programming, literature, or science, they want to learn everything, and we have to grab their attention. This year is a very symbolic year. On the 10th of December this year, we will celebrate the 20th anniversary of Ada Lovelace, often considered the world's first computer programmer, after she created the first algorithm for use on a machine. I think it should stimulate our discussions. It's an aim to encourage women and to encourage governments to do their part. And to conclude, ICT came to stay. ICT is our future. Women are here to stay. Women are future of every society. So ICT needs a much larger part of women in it. And we are focused to cooperate in that direction, and are looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
What kind of lives could we have if we had a different set of freedoms? And I think technology and the internet in particular has really given this to us. And so what we've done over the last year is we've developed a set of principles that we use to talk about the value of the internet in women's rights work. And so what I'm going to do today is to ask us to imagine what would universal, affordable, unfettered, and unconditional and equal access to technology and the internet create. So just imagine this, and these are some of the things that we think will be possible. The first is that we will have a truly transformed public and political space that facilitates new forms of citizenship and allows individuals to claim, construct, and express ourselves. And this can happen across territories. It gives us tools to demand accountability and transparency, and most importantly, opportunities for movement building, because this is one of the things that technology has given us, the ability to leap over many different kinds of barriers. The second thing is that we will have women and feminists creating and experimenting with technology using open source tools, which is a very critical issue for us in this work. Radicalizing what kind of technology is produced, by whom, and for what. Will be a world where we are defining our own concerns and our own needs. And we see now that a lot of tech development is responding to a very particular set of priorities. And that's a very economically driven priority, in a very narrow sense of what economic empowerment is. And we think that this definitely is something that needs to be troubled. And when we think about the SDGs, this becomes particularly important because of the very strong focus on public-private partnerships and the role of the private sector in producing technologies that are shifting, that are bringing new ways of development. The third thing that will happen is that we will have access to critical information on health, education, the environment, and there'll be different ways to practice cultural expression. The next two are very important to us. And that is, it will be a world in which privacy is a precondition. I think when we speak about the internet today, we often speak about things like mass surveillance, states surveilling each other. And there's very little conversation around the surveillance that happens between individuals. And we know that this kind of surveillance is a very strong experience of women, particularly those in domestic and violent relationships, in domestic violent relationships. So what we're saying is it will be a world where we can exercise control over our own data and also know who has access to it and under what conditions. The next point, I think, will respond to the concern raised by our colleague from Germany around this tension between freedom of expression and the development of other kinds of laws. We've done a lot of work around violence against women online since about 2006. And this includes, I hate saying the word ordinary women journalists, women politicians, high-profile women who simply have a cell phone in their hand. And one of the things that we found is that there's very little remedy, there's very little recourse that women who have these kinds of experiences can take. And this has caused a great deal of anxiety as we see states starting to develop policies to respond to this, but within a context of great anxiety and great moral panic around the kind of data and sexual speech that people have access to precisely because of the internet. And so we are seeing a shift and a kind of move from certain states to use this notion of women need to be protected. So we need to develop laws that are going to protect women from experiencing a certain kind of very terrible speech. So this definitely is a trend. And as we're talking about the development of laws, this is something that we really need to pay quite a lot of attention to. The second issue that we often are confronted with is around some of our freedom of speech and freedom of expression advocates saying, you women, all you want is censorship. You're calling for content regulation. You are saying that this content needs to be removed. And what we are actually saying is that this content is harmful. And if we're talking about freedom of expression, we have to talk about the conditions under which everybody has the ability to express themselves freely. So if we have 52% of the population on the internet being unable to express themselves freely, that is a freedom of expression issue, and it's a freedom of expression issue for women. I also just wanted to talk a bit about the private sector. I'll have an opportunity to talk about our recommendations a bit later on. And they definitely are a huge actor in this new world. Precisely because often when women experience violence online, the first place they go to for immediate help is the place where it happened. They go to Facebook, they go to Google, they go to Twitter, they go to YouTube. And we're finding that those responses are also equally inadequate. And the language and the discourse around private sector private sector is one of what are they liable for? And the question actually is, what are they responsible for? And this shifting of the conversation is really critical, especially at this moment, when we are talking about the liability of private companies, the liability of intermediaries. And I think the last point that I wanted to make was that this world will also be a world where women's rights activists and women themselves are present. Because we are at a moment right now in the history of the world where we are developing cybersecurity policies, where the Internet Governance Forum is talking about mass surveillance and data protection. But we're not talking about women, and we're not talking about what are the specific consequences of being absent from those conversations in this world where ICTs and the Internet has become so central. And the last point that I wanted to make was around this idea that ICTs are a luxury. You know, as someone who comes from South Africa, we grew up hearing that the first thing we have to do is deal with race. Yeah? And if we deal with race, everything else is going to follow. What we did not deal with were extremely high levels of violence against women way back then. And now we are sitting with a huge, huge, huge problem, which was always there. And so the one point that I want to make around this is that actually there is going to be a point where it is not a luxury, because it already is not a luxury. And I think we really need to insist that media and ICTs they're central, they are enablers. And unless we make this argument really, really fiercely all the time, even when we hear things like, how can you talk about ICTs when women are starving? Our responses have to be, okay, this is why. Because it's about access to information, it's about access to a range of different sets of enabling conditions. And I think we have to do that.
Thank you, well said. Thanks to all of you.